Well, welcome back to another talk about families and addiction and all the things that comes with that, alcoholism, addiction, whatever you're struggling with in your family. We want to assist you with the various topics that come up and how to handle them. I'm Melody Bacon. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist.
And I'm Ron Bacon. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist.
And we have created a program for families struggling with addiction called the Family Matters program. It's an online program that you can take at whatever pace you would like, but it's designed to help families because there's so little out there for family members, and getting treatment is the focus perhaps for the addict or alcoholic, but then what is there for the family? Not too much. So today we want to talk about that, and specifically we want to kind of talk about what it's like to go into rehab, what you can expect as a family member, but also so you have some insight into what's going on for your family member when they're in rehab, because you're not seeing a lot and sometimes people come up with the wrong ideas about certain things.
That one thing to know for sure is that there's a time warp that takes place,
Mm.
that your loved one is going to be there. And 1 week is hugely significant.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, these are 4 week intense
Mm-hmm.
programs. By the time they're there a second week, they are well into it. A
Mm-hmm.
third and a fourth week, I mean, it's just night and day differences. I know as a therapist, I could watch the progress
Mm-hmm.
of a person in that. And even the difference between day one and day three is gigantic.
Yeah.
It really is. So it's hard to appreciate it as a family member when, one, you're not hearing anything from
Right.
them for about 5 days.
Mm-hmm.
That's it's by design, and the idea is that they become part of this community.
Mm-hmm.
And so, what for a family member, you're having to deal with all the stuff all by yourself.
Mm-hmm.
There's no help. The addict may not have been all that much help anyway, but at
Mm-hmm.
least they were there. And now they aren't. And you're doing everything. And that may mean more scramble. Your days are packed. And they're going to ask you to do even more. And if you
Mm-hmm.
can go to Al Anon, that would be super, or Nar-Anon, all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
But for you, by the time the 28 days or 30 days is done, it will seem like what they just got there.
Right.
And to your loved one, it's going to seem like they've been gone a year.
Right. So
And
there, yeah, there's
it's
a big
huge.
difference.
It's huge.
So let's talk a little bit about just the logistics.
Sure.
Because a lot of times family members have spent a lot of energy, a lot of praying, a lot of pleading to get the person to finally get into treatment.
Mm-hmm.
So they're all thrilled. They're bringing them into the treatment
Yes.
center and taking them into the office. And what's typically the first thing that will happen then when that person is checking in, so to speak?
They are going to bring in all their luggage, their stuff. Some people get here with absolutely nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Here, meaning when I was working at a treatment center in the area,
Mm-hmm.
that some show up with nothing, some show up with all kinds of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. And so, whatever stuff they bring, the house manager, this is somebody generally in early recovery or in a certain amount of recovery. They're working there, wanting to eventually be case managers.
Mm-hmm.
These are people who are direct hands-on with the clients,
Right.
and they go through all the stuff. They look at everything, making sure that the community stays safe, that nothing illicit is brought onto the
So
site.
they're looking for drugs,
Alcohol.
alcohol, which can include mouthwash, hand
And now in
sanitizer,
California, it's certainly pot.
pot.
Anything that doesn't
It may be
support
legal, but
sobriety.
it's not
Yes.
part of the sober living
Mm-hmm.
environment. So they're going to go through all that. They're going to
Yes.
ask the family members to say goodbye.
Yep.
And that can be tough when,
Mhm.
you kind of want to see where they're going to be sleeping or where they're going to be residing.
Mhm.
But it's really important, as you mentioned, that they get integrated into this community quickly. And that's the reason for about the 5-day blackout
Mhm.
period from using a phone of any kind. Their cell phone will not be available to them during the time they're in treatment, mainly because, people that can contact their dealers, or they can contact friends that may not be supportive of their
Mhm.
efforts in rehab. So after 5 days, though, generally they can call you on their landline that's available, and it'll
Mhm.
be probably about 10 minutes because
Mhm.
everybody else is wanting to call their family
Mhm.
and loved ones. Um, so what's a typical day like, though? So they get checked in, they're going to have a roommate
Mhm.
generally,
Generally.
and then they'll be assigned someone, I guess, that's kind of more senior in terms of time there.
Yeah, somebody who they've been there, it'll be in their second or third week, so they know the ropes and
Yeah.
know what the job duties are. Everybody gets chores, and they learn to be responsible.
Right. Yeah, so they're going to get oriented
Hmm.
to how the community works, what the responsibilities are. And generally, there's on average, what, 5 to 6 meetings a day that they're
I would
attending?
say so that wake up, I believe, was at 6:30. As a therapist, I would show up. My first group was at 9, and they've already had a meeting before I
Mm-hmm.
got there. And that meeting was, they called it 3Gs. This is where men would state, what they're good at, what they're grateful for, and what their goal for the
Mm-hmm.
day is. And
Right.
then some would add a fourth G, which is how they see God.
Mm.
And
So they start out with that every
that's
day,
every day.
and then
Yeah.
they're going to have groups run by either a licensed therapist like
Hmm.
yourself,
Hmm.
or a chemical addictions counselor. That's a certification in
Hmm.
California, that's the state oversees. And they will run groups as well. They
Hmm.
will run a variety of them,
Hmm.
really.
That, yes, and it does give some authenticity.
Mm-hmm.
Most case managers are recovering and can share from their own experience what they've seen,
Mm-hmm.
people who are successful versus those who aren't. And that,
Plus, they have the training. They've got
yes, yep.
the necessary coursework at the college
Hmm.
level, and then they have passed an examination to be
Hmm.
certified as a chemical addiction counselor.
Hmm.
And each person in the treatment center will have a case manager who is responsible for overseeing
Hmm.
their treatment, checking in with them regularly to see how things are going, but also communicating with the family, and the family can
Right,
communicate with them.
right. That this is a process. It is not generally a straight line. You put
Mm-hmm.
them into
Mm-hmm.
rehab, and then they come out well. I
Right.
wish it were. Sometimes it does work that way. Some people that
It's
was their
rare,
last use, but yeah, the numbers just don't
at least
support
the
that.
first time.
Hmm.
So what the research does show is that what helps people stay sober is some kind of a structured
Yes, yeah,
environment
definitely.
and a program, that one might follow. So this is why, 12 steps are going to be also a part of a treatment program, AA, HA, Heroin Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, because the treatment center is also aware that 30 days is just the beginning.
Yeah, yeah.
And this is to think about this more like cancer treatment. We all know that somebody can have a cancer, let's say stage 3. They will go in, maybe get a surgery to take out whatever can be found. But we understand that that's not enough, that that person's going to have a treatment regimen of medication and diet and many other things, maybe chemotherapy, radiation. So if you think about this more of in those terms,
Hmm.
that the 30 days in rehab is the beginning of
Hmm.
treatment, and then moving forward, they're going to have to do some other things. And the other thing I forgot to mention was that sometimes prior to starting treatment, the person may go to detox,
Mhm.
and that is determined by the medical director of the facility, who will have an interview with them to determine if they need to have a medical supervised
Mhm.
detox. Not everybody needs to when they come in. It just depends on a lot of factors.
Yeah.
But detox is not treatment. Some people will go and think that that's it. You have to realize, those of you don't struggle with your own addiction or alcoholism, that this drug use or alcohol use is really more along the lines of food or water to a normal person. It becomes that important to them, and the science is very clear that the brain associates it on that level of
Mhm.
importance. So what you're seeing isn't just a willfulness; it's a
Mm.
desperation,
Yeah.
and uh, I think what is hard to understand is how something that for most people is a voluntary, sometimes not even it's something you wouldn't even choose to do. Um, you know, for for an addict, it's life or death, and
Mhm.
thinking that they're going to have to live the rest of their lives without it is overwhelming. And so sometimes what you'll see, depending on how many treatment episodes somebody's had, the first time around, they may still in their mind be bargaining, so to speak, with I'm going to figure out a way to continue to use, but just to minimize the damage.
Mhm. Yeah, definitely. Uh, so denial minimization is a
Hmm.
big, I mean, that's one of the hallmarks of this disease. It's what makes it so difficult for you. You may have said you've been drinking, and they will say no, right to your face. They will, and
Hmm.
you learn after a while, wow, I'm not going to be their comp. I'm not going to,
Hmm.
that if you're a spouse or you're a parent, you get clear on what you will or won't
Right.
do. And this is harder than it looks
It
also
is.
for you. That's why we
That's
have the
right.
Family Matters program, that if you could just take and do this on your own, you'd do it. But we
Yeah.
see people struggling with it and falling into and not knowing, am I supporting sobriety or am I enabling the
Hmm.
disease? And it's,
Not even knowing what to do in
yes,
general.
yeah,
So the person in treatment will be regularly drug tested, usually
yes.
through urine testing. Anytime they go off campus for anything, they will also, in addition to their psychotherapy groups and psychoeducation groups, they will go to 12-step meetings pretty much every day. They will also do usually some other learning
Hmm.
activity, depending on the facility, that will help them reinforce what they're learning in the groups, in terms of written exercises. We used to do in a treatment center I worked in for women, they'd write a goodbye letter to their drug, and then we'd share it in the group, and it would be a lot of tears. It was a deeply meaningful activity, but a healing in some ways, recognition of how this drug of choice has served them on some level, even as it's destroyed their lives.
Hmm.
So that's the typical schedule. They're going to also have responsibilities for the community,
Hmm.
working in the kitchen or
Hmm.
helping out in other areas. Usually those things rotate. So it may look like, you might see as a family member a ping pong table or you know, a nice backyard with a pool or something, and think, oh, great, this looks like a resort. But the experience for the people in treatment is that it's really a lot of work. It's also a lot of work because they're not feeling very well usually. They haven't been able to use the drug that they usually use to make themselves feel better. And then they have all these emotions as well
Hmm.
going on. So it's a very difficult process on many levels.
If your loved one is fortunate enough to be in a healthy community,
Hmm.
recovering community,
Hmm.
it will serve as a mirror. And
Yeah.
everything you've seen about them, that community will mirror back to them.
Right.
They will see it. You don't have to confront them, you
Hmm.
don't have to get in their face. Trust the process. It all happens within that 30 days. it all shows up because, if there is a pool and they get to swim in it, if they're a selfish narcissist, that's your impression, they're going to show it even when they're swimming,
Mm-hmm.
and they will get confronted by their peers about it.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is all going to happen. I think two things that I've seen family members, the mistake they've made
Mm.
is they deny and minimize how long this will take.
Mm-hmm.
And so then they want to get to the, well, when can I tell them what they did to me part?
Mm.
They,
Mm-hmm.
they cut to that too quickly. If you trust the process, they will get to making amends.
Mm-hmm.
They will get there, but it's not going to be on your timing. And it feels like, well, wow, they're saying they're sorry to everybody else, and just to trust the process that if they are to be sober, they will get there.
Well, and this is why it's so important for you as a family member to go to Al-Anon,
Oh my, yes.
Nar-Anon, for Narcotics Anonymous, both,
Mm-hmm.
because these are other people who have been down this road, who are experiencing what you are, who have found a way to do it, though, so that they're not carrying all the pain, that they have found serenity and peace, even though their loved one may still be in an active addiction, or maybe they are in recovery and there's still issues that come up. So there's resources for you. These are support groups, these are programs. You will learn about the 12 steps at the same time that your loved one is
Mm-hmm.
learning about the 12 steps. That can be
Mm-hmm.
a kind of a bonding experience.
So let go and let God is one of the sayings,
Right.
and that you apply it when you're angry.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the predominant emotion I see when family members are finally relieved
Right.
that their loved one is finally doing something. The anger is
Yes,
gigantic,
you've
and it
heard
just
us.
rolls in waves and waves and waves. And it's so hard to get to your own fear and hurt is
Right.
probably
It's
true. But
underneath all that.
right now, your loved one is just not in a place where they can hear it.
Right.
And to have people who can hear it, because you do
Mm-hmm.
need to be able to share that and talk about
Yes.
that. The other thing that that family members can fall prey to is trying to provide the structure once their loved one comes
Mm-hmm.
home. That, Melody is talking about the usefulness, the essential nature of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And often the family member is the structured person.
Mm-hmm.
And to structure your time and your focus and not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really hard when you see them floundering around.
Yeah.
You know?
Yes. So while they're in treatment, usually there's a family day, often Sunday, where you'll have a psychoeducation group that
Mm-hmm.
one or more family members can attend with the addict or alcoholic. And then sometimes, given, depending on what the situation is, you can go off campus and go to lunch, and you kind of let people, you have to sign them out and let them know how long you'll be, that kind of thing. And then when they come back, they'll do a P test and make sure they're clean. Um, Psychoeducation groups can be helpful, but they're not psychotherapy, and they are
Mm-hmm.
not going to help you make the changes you need moving forward, because as we just said, it's about 30 days inpatient, and oftentimes you get somebody in and you think, oh, thank God. And during that 30 days, you haven't had to worry about them. You know where they are. They're not on the streets. They're safe. And then as the time comes toward discharge, your anxiety is going to go up because, you're aware that, oh, shoot, now what?
Mm-hmm.
So most programs will have from 30-day inpatient, you will move into a semi-structured program where you will live in a different facility. You'll go to the main facility for groups, but you will have a little bit more freedom. There will be a house manager there. So the house manager is the person, there'll be one 24/7 to make sure that they're safe and that they're, maintaining their sobriety and, that type of thing, be a resource for people. And then the case manager will still be at the treatment facility. And that's usually about a 30-day program. And then you can step down to even more freedom, go back to work or school or whatever. And a lot of people at that point choose to go to a sober living house.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that one will be one that you want to look into as the family member to make sure that it's well run, it's following the principles of sobriety. But the 90 days is the best start of a structured program of some sort, and then continuing on from there with a 12-step meeting and a sponsor in 12-step to help them move through the steps, and somebody that they can talk to 24/7 whenever they feel like they're going to go out and use, or they're not sure they can make it another day, that type of thing.
That eventually the last step of the 12 steps is acts of service, and acts of service do begin at home. Just know that it's not you carrying the load forever.
Right.
When your loved one is, they're going to do stuff for their 12-step group and community and all that kind of stuff. And eventually it does lead to being a full-on partner again, if you can hang in there, but it's tough.
So what we've seen is that often family members start to complain when someone finally gets out of treatment that they're going to meetings all the time.
Yes, now they're addicted to AA.
And again, this is going to undermine their sobriety. Yes. And you wouldn't be saying that to someone who was going to chemo or radiation or any other kind of treatment. This is really a disease. We highly recommend that you watch a film called Pleasure Unwoven. I believe you can access it online. It's by Kevin McCauley, who is a physician and who had his own addiction issues, and he came to this process of recovery with the question, well, how do we know this is a disease? Isn't this a matter of choice? And he does a really good job of exploring that, looking at this brain science of how things work and how the addiction changes the way the brain functions. And so because unless you can understand that this is a disease, you're going to keep seeing this as willful behavior.
Yeah, that if your loved one loved you more, they wouldn't do what they're doing.
Right.
And, why isn't your love enough? Some of those questions, it's very painful and hurtful, and they're inaccurate. They're not good questions.
So that's how a rehab generally works. Again, there's going to be some differences depending on the program, but it's generally going to include psychotherapy. You might have also a component of individual psychotherapy with one-on-one, with group therapy, psychoeducation. You're going to be going to 12 steps. You're going to be part of a community. You're going to be talking about a lot of things with people that understand. And then, stepping into less and less structure, but maintaining the structure of a 12-step or a smart recovery if a person would prefer that program, which is not a 12-step, but it's still aimed at helping people stay sober and have weekly meetings and a community. So hopefully that's helpful to you as you are navigating this world. Do keep in mind, as you probably will have heard, if you haven't already, you will, that relapse is part of the disease. And again, this is not unlike cancer or diabetes, heart disease, high blood pressure, for example. People will relapse on those meds.
You want to say recurrence? Is another way.
But if you are walking the talk in your own Al-Anon or Nar-Anon program and achieving serenity and peace, it will be less of an anxiety-provoking experience. Not that you're not going to care, but you'll be less caught up in the unmanageability of addiction and that person is likely to get back into treatment and move forward fairly quickly.
During my many years of working in rehab, I saw people coming back for a second or third time. I mean, it just and some would come in and tell me this is their fourth or fifth or sixth, however many times. Some many more than that, but that I knew I was building on work they had already done. They
Yeah,
aren't starting at
right.
zero,
No.
and that there was a much better chance of them getting it this time than the first time.
Yes, I
Mhm.
just finished a book on family therapy and substance abuse treatment, and interviewed a number of people who had been in long-term recovery, 20 years on average. And all of them told me, even though most of them had had multiple treatment episodes, the last, what made the difference, the last one, last time around, was that they finally just did everything that they were told to do by their sponsors and the treatment team, and weren't trying to figure out a way around some of the suggestions. And what for some people that might not take multiple times.
Mhm.
I've worked with people where there was one and done. You know,
Mhm.
they went through. I had a client a young woman who went through for alcoholism, discharged, got together with some other people in sobriety, and spent a year living in an apartment with other people working their programs. And that's all, she's been
It
sober
worked.
now 5, 6 years.
Mhm.
But she spent that time. Other people, it maybe takes a little bit longer, or they may need another time around the bend. So in the meantime, check out the Family Matters program
Mhm.
online. It's under Relationship University teachable.com, and you can see a little bit more about that, and we'll continue to post the